Okay, I'm going to stop you there now. I think what we can hear is that you've got issues with change. Is that a fair assumption? Have you got questions about change? Have you got change projects that are about to hit you? I certainly have where I'm working at the moment. I've got a massive change project going on between now and next year. So what we're going to do is our three experts are first of all going to speak separately, and then we'll come together at the end for a panel, but there will be space in between their presentations for you to ask any immediate questions. Does that work for you? Thank you. Thank you for the response. It's lovely to see. Okay, so we're going to start with Florence. And Florence is an ex-offshore scientist, flutist, and ex-socio-psychologist researcher who is currently partnering with Dynamic Leadership to shape the future by facilitating the emergence of very strong company culture and specifically orientated towards innovation. Florence is the author of 2 books as well on self-leadership, which she defines as a skill that employees need to face uncertainty and the rhythm of our fast-paced world as we step towards the future. And if you were in the plenary this morning, I'm sure that that will have had resonance with you. So I'm going to hand the floor over to Florence, who's going to share her knowledge and experience with you. Thank you, Florence.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here, and thank you, Julie, for such a great introduction. So I know it's after lunch, so we're going to wake up a bit, right? And there was a lot of talk about change, but I don't know if you noticed this morning how much invitation we have been given by the different speakers to think about change as well. And for me, it's a fascinating subject. And what is very interesting is even though we know change is a constant, we still tend to look at it as something aside. So we want to bring change really part of what we do. That's a bit what we're going to talk about today. If the clicker is working. Oops. It was? Yes. Excellent. So managing a budget definitely is something that I do, at least in my case, most of the time. But you know, they are numbers. They add, they subtract, they follow predefined and reliable rules. Managing someone, it's already a different story. It's a bit like I have to step into someone's mind to be able to do it. Managing a change, if we look at people like numbers, yeah, maybe we can see it this way. But is that really what we still want to encourage? Somewhere we know managing a change is an illusion. And for a lot of different reasons, but I'm going to highlight 3 for you today. First, we cannot change others. I'm sure all of you here in this room, you've tried. Spouses, partner, kids, nieces, nephew, your own manager. Not a chance. Most of the time, the only thing we've been able to do is actually to inspire them to change. To get them to feel that it is needed, it's a good idea. And then they can build up the desire, they can build up the motivation, and they're going to actually change. Which is interesting for our third fact is, so far, organizations are still made of people. And to no surprise to anyone in this room, if the people within that organization do not decide to change, that is going to be tricky. Because these people within the organization, they're the one creating the movement and the change. So we need to move to something else. We need to start thinking about enabling change. What is going to be interesting, you will see later, is actually it's not black and white. We know it's more like a continuum, and we're sometimes going to be activating managing change mechanism and sometimes enabling change mechanism. But we know that the more we go toward enabling change, the more buy-in and engagement we're going to create. What do we mean by enabling change? We actually mean giving ownership of the change to the people most impacted by the change. It even goes somewhere stronger. When you enable change, you actually looked at people within your company as your business partner, strategic business partner. And I'm stealing that sentence from Mark Orwell when he was actually looking at people from his company, the other leaders, as his business strategic partner, to be able to think about the change he wanted to create to implement this culture of learning within the company as NECA. So we're going to come back to some of the few things he said. So how do we do that? We give ownership of people of the change. There is not a one-size-fits-all. That would be too easy. It's all going to depend about the change, about the audience, about the behavior you want to let go, about the behavior you want to adopt, about exactly what you want to create. Is it a culture change? Is it just about implementing a new tool? You get into a lot of different situations. But one thing that is going to be common to a lot of the context is creating space for meaningful conversation. The other thing you want to know is Julie, my colleague, she's going to give you 7 great tips of enabling change that is also going to make it easier for you. And one of them, one of the tips she talks connect with this space we create for meaningful conversations. So by that, I do not mean to create space when we inform people. This, we do it very often. But informing is a telltale mechanism. Here, we're really looking for space when we exchange. Several things happen when you create meaningful conversations. You give space for people to voice any doubt or fear they could have versus what's going to happen. And here again, I can go back to Julie because she's got this fantastic expression to feel the fear factor. But then another thing happens is you actually open the space to collect data, operational data, that's going to give you way more information about how you can make that change a success. Rather than going there thinking you have the answer, you're actually going to build with people what are the answers we want to talk about. Now, one confusion here. Creating the space for meaningful conversation is not about looking for consensus. No, decision would have to be made. Some decision would not make everybody happy, but you will still have the space for them to exchange around it. Now, enabling change is often a culture change by itself, and you're going to love its ramifications. 2 things are going to happen the more you enable change. You're going to create an increase of self-leadership within your community. People are going to become more autonomous, and they're going to be with higher self-leadership. You're also going to create higher level of trust and psychological safety within your community. And that's where there is something really, really cool about it, is high trust and high self-leadership bring us right there in that top right corner where innovation can happen. This is where companies want to be able to actually face the complexity of today's world, become agile, and react. It would be very easy if that enabling change was not about creating a shift. And there's a lot of different shifts we can talk about, but I'm going to just highlight 3 today that I really like. There is one about what needs to shift at the C-suite. And Nejri this morning, she mentioned vulnerability. And I was so pleased, because yes, there is this notion, vulnerability is about understanding. Maybe it's no longer the role of the C-suite to have all the answer, for instance. Maybe it's just about giving direction. And you can see my colleague Saskia saying yes. So I'm going to stop here as a teaser on this C-suite, because she's got 5 great lessons learned to share with you by working with C-suite. Now, there is another shift that is very interesting, is at us. Change facilitator, L&D, HR, sometimes internal communicator. 2 things here that I'm going to highlight for you. We want to stop creating resistance for change. Now, just out of fun, how many of you have started working on a change implementation plan, hearing the presupposition that people do not like to change? Raise your hand. I'm impressed. Not that many. Wow, that's good. But no, if truly that was the case, none of us would be here to talk about it. No single couple would ever decide to have kids, and humanity would be extinct. So what people do not like is not change, but what they do not like is not having the ownership of the change, because that means losing autonomy. That creates fear for their sense of being, their sense of self, and that's going to activate what we call psychological reactance. What we want instead is to have engagement. Another thing we want to pay attention to is the word we use. At the moment, there is a big one in fashion, it's transformation. Everything becomes a transformation. Now, it's a bit like the wolf story. If we keep using something that doesn't lead to a transformation, we're going to discredit ourselves. But also, transformation, agree, it's a beautiful word. My ego loves being called a transformation coach, but that's my ego. People, when they see me, and if I'm labeled as a transformation coach, they fear. They're just like, no, this is going to be something that's going to completely turn my world upside down. When actually what we just want them to do is sometimes to change. And we want this to be part of their day-to-day routine. Be comfortable that change is actually a constant. So we're going to keep that in mind. Another interesting shift is our notion of ownership, focus, and time when it comes to change. And I'm going to focus a bit with time today, because time is one of the biggest opponents to enabling change. There is this huge misconception that enabling change is taking much longer than managing a change. Now, if we look at traditional timeline of change, we're going to have that. Day one, we inform people. Then we roll out a lot of activities, from learning, from workshops, from demonstration of new behavior, from information sessions, until the end of the change, when we collect metrics. And we know that most of the time, the metrics we really want is actually coming 6 months later, which is about the impact we created. Now, is that truly the first day of the change? I do challenge that the first day of the change happened way before. When someone in management, or a few people within management, are starting to think we need to change something. And then usually what they do is they go onto a retreat somewhere, a few people together, and then they create a beautiful what, and then they come back and they give to us that what and say, no, please, create an amazing how that we can actually release that how on the X. And then we want people to just change as quickly as possible. There is something really fascinating about that timeline. Can you see it? The people most impacted by the change are usually the ones with the least time to know about it or to get accustomed to it. Part of enabling change is about using this preparation time for everyone. No, it may not always be feasible for every type of change, agree. So that's why we're going to think about, where do we put the needle from one to another one, from managing to enabling. So I'm going to share 2 examples with you. And before I move the example, you're going to see that on purpose, I'm a bit blurry about timeline, because I want us to step aside from time. Time is a result-focused metrics. But I want us to think about impact-focused metrics. What are the impact we create? And when you are with your team and you think about what mechanism we want to use, it's not that it's going to be one that is right and one that is wrong. It's more going to be about, if I use this mechanism, what impact do I create? If I enable, what do I facilitate? Does the enabling help me to accelerate what I want to do? So here, it was about changing a tool to facilitate information protection. Okay, we have the day one. IT start to realize it would be good to do something. And then they just want and start to think about, who are the business that are really going to be impacted? Because if we want this to be a success, we want our business in the loop as soon as possible. So they get the business in the loop. They start to really work together until they can release the new tool. And from that, they identify champion, and then they start to go to the end of the change. Now, there was 4 mechanisms that was really connected to enabling change that did make a huge difference. There was this notion of co-ownership, IT and business. There was the fact that process and tool review were made at the same times. So at the same time we assess the tool, business assess their process and what to change. And then they were really building it as a team. So it was no longer an IT change. It was not a business change. It was a collective change. But that was something really interesting because spontaneously, they saw a common objective. And that common objective became about, we are doing something that's going to help protect our business. Another thing that came up spontaneously was the identification of champion that I mentioned just a bit earlier. Now, if some of you were at Marco Well's presentation, you could see that this is some of the mechanism he used himself to actually work with his leadership, because he get all the leaders in the room to co-create what could be the solution. He also tested different solutions, and at the end, he ended up having a solution not being the one he would have voted for, because he looked for building it together. So there was mechanism to enable change. Now, the second example I have is slightly different. It's about implementing a new vision and an updated strategy. And you're right, this is a bit tougher type of change because it really means a culture change. It was really about getting people at the operation to think strategy and connect what they were doing on the day-to-day to the bigger picture of what the department was trying to build up. What is very interesting here is you have two mechanisms. You start like a traditional managing change approach. The leadership goes somewhere, build a vision, build a strategy, get that to the communication team that prepare a fantastic communication package according to their criteria, and then release that to the team. And from day X, we move to enabling mechanism, because the ownership then is given to the community. They have the responsibility to make it happen. Now, this change is still ongoing, and from my perspective of a change manager, I think it's going extremely slow. And I see that going extremely slow because of 4 key elements I've highlighted for you. First, the initial constraint given, they create a real disconnection between the operation and the strategy. But even the vocabulary used to describe it could not make sense to the community in charge of implementing it. And then, because there is this disconnect, there is not a true ownership. So they never saw themselves as really being allied. It's more like management gave us a task, but we did not co-own the results. Something also interesting, there was no identification of champions, and no spontaneous common goal that come up. And for me, I could see that if we had an enabling from day one, that means we ask everybody what could be the next strategy and we build it together, then I would have been way stronger. It doesn't mean that management is not going to be the one making the decision. It just means that they collect more data to have a more enlightened type of decision. Now, enough of my talking. What about some of your questions?
Questions for Florence? Lady there. Yeah, oh, I need to come down, didn't I? Sorry. No, it's not fair.
Oh. Thank you very much. Hello, thank you for that. You talked about enabling your co-workers, your colleagues, not just IT, but also the business side, to join when you're discussing change management. How do you balance inviting people to join, inviting people to be part of the process, inviting people to be your champions, and the time management of actually getting decisions made and getting things done?
Yeah, that's going to be one of the key elements. How do you balance it? And it's not always to be about involving everybody. Sometimes if you identify champions, you can actually be quicker because then you have less people in a room. And what is the best strategy will depend about the type of change. If it's a huge change that's going to have huge impact on people's life, you're going to be stronger if you get them really into the conversation, but every single one. But if it's a change, like changing an IT tool, like the first example I share, if you just have a champion that represents the community and they can collect data for the community, they can talk about it on a regular basis, then that will work. So you will assess based on the complete type of change you want to implement.
Florence, we have another question.
Hi, Florence.
Hi.
Yeah, thanks. Loads of food for thought there. I mean, what I was really fascinated with is the idea that the teams who are most impacted by the change are the ones that you want to drive it. But you also mentioned about in kind of having those meaningful conversations, the objective, you can't expect that you'll get consensus. So what if the teams who are most impacted are feeling quite negative about that change? How do you kind of bring them on board and help them take ownership to drive that change?
Okay, I'm not sure I completely get the question, but if I rephrase it, it's about how to get on board disagreement within the conversations.
Yeah, so those teams impacted by the change that you want to drive the change, what if they are anti the change, they're against it? How do you bring them along?
Okay, so if they're handling a change and they have no ownership about deciding what that change can be, and that change is going to highly impact them, this is an approach, but it's going to create high resistance because they lost autonomy. So if you can't have the meaningful conversation beforehand, you can still have them after, but you're less efficient because people will just feel like things are being imposed onto them, and you're going to have to find a way to turn the balance that they can take back some ownership. And that's always harder. Now, I was going to say, to complete on that, this is where the link with psychological safety is interesting, because if you truly give space for the meaningful conversation, you're going to have to educate people to disagree, to agree to disagree, but still to be able to find common solution that works for the bigger picture.
I've just got time for one more question quickly.
I think actually it might be the same question or building on the question just there. So it's really about, you said people need to not expect consensus. So I think you were just sort of getting into that. In those meaningful spaces for conversation, how do you build something in common? It's that gap between, we haven't arrived at consensus, but we need to move forward with a common purpose. That's the space I'm interested in.
Somewhere it's going to be about, I'm going to use the word elevate, but it may not be the right word, but it could be about taking the conversation to another level, because most of the time when we cannot identify consensus is because we focus on primary task, for instance. But if you go to, okay, but why do we do this primary task? What are we really trying to achieve? And you looked at the higher objective, that's usually where you find the consensus. And then where you have the consensus at the higher objective, then you can just go back down to, yeah, but okay, that's going to mean some change for you, but we know why we do that. And the IT change small timeline I show, this is exactly what were happening, because IT came from a very different perspective. Cost saving, we need to implement that tool. Business wanted something different just for their capability to protect information. But they had to understand that none of them could have the tool they wanted because the solution was imposed by X, Y reasons. But they could identify that what was important is this was going to allow to protect the information, and this was the higher objective they were looking for. So then it was looking at back, okay, how we integrate that into our daily practice.
Thank you, Florence. So I'd just like to thank Florence for her session there. So thank you. There we go. And now we're going to move on to Saskia. And Saskia Vandenberg from the Netherlands. Saskia's been working on change management for about 18 years and has been working for Philips for the last 4 years. She's passionate about building competence and supporting organisations with change. So here comes your second perspective. Saskia.
Thank you so much. So we talked already a lot about change is constant, but I actually have another way that I like to think about the place where we currently are with change. And it's, I've written it down, change has never been this fast, but it will never be this slow. And I think hearing the talks today, this morning, that really resonates with where we are today. And as Julie said, I'm a change manager, and we are in a trade that is so needed now. And talking to many of you, change is also so needed in this L&D space. So I'm very happy to be here with you, and I'm very happy to have you with me today. As Florence already said, I'm working with a lot of leaders, and what I like to do today in the next couple of minutes is take you on a little bit of a journey. What have I been through? What have I learned from leaders, and how am I using them to be key enablers in this journey in change? One of the things that I always like with leaders is to get them working as well. So I'm going to do that with you as well. So I have Menti. I love using Menti. You can do two things. Either you can scan the QR code. I see a couple of people using that already, awesome. Or you can go to menti.com, put in the code, it just requires a little bit of typing. And that should get you to my first question. It's a question I always love to ask, and it is, what are the first words that come to mind when you think about change? So, can I just see a show of hands if Menti's coming up? Yeah? Awesome. Could we see it start building up? Oh, I need to do that. Connection lost. Lovely. Okay, we thought as much. Okay, internet is down. Nice. Then we don't see the answers, actually. If you could log in, no, let's not do that. Just going to try if it has remembered, because otherwise I need to log in. That's never fun. It's connecting. Okay. Can I maybe people shout out some words? What do you think of when you think of change?
Opportunity. Resistance.
Life, resistance. Sorry? Benefit.
Frustration.
You've got improvement there.
Improvement. Oh, look at that. Yes. Oh, love it. Thank you. Oh, look at that.
Patience.
Patience. That's definitely not one that comes up. Okay, let's look at this one. So we heard a couple of words already. Resistance, opportunity, those are words that very often pop up. Challenge, difficult. Conversations. I think you might have inspired something there, Florence. Benefit, learning, unknown. One of the reasons why I really like asking this question is that it gives you a sense of where people are with their mind when you think about change. I'm talking to a lot of people about this, so for me it really helps to know and understand where they are with their mindset. And I love seeing here that there is a lot on resistance, difficult, challenge, but there's also the opportunity, improvement, success. And I think that balance makes change really, really interesting. And if I ask my groups these kind of things, I always use this first question to get a sanity check. And if you have a group that's really, really oriented towards opportunity, moving, answers, go, then there's a great benefit in that, right? So going, moving. But there's also a risk there, because there's a risk that they might be running really, really fast, and as Florence showed, left a lot of people behind. At the other side, what you also have a risk of, I've done many of these clouds, and I've had one where it literally also said, ugh, and resistance. If your leaders that are in front of you, that are supposed to get the other people with you, if that's their mindset on change, then you have other work to do. So, could we get to the slide? Next one. Oh, I can do that? Yes. So this is what word clouds could look like with the sessions that I've done. You can see the ugh one as well. So these are just some examples of groups that I've been with. But I wanted to ask you another question. So, if all is well, if you go back to your mentee, you will get a new question. And that is, what words come to mind when you think about the role of a leader? during change, yes. Love it. Ooh, there's one that says helps overcome mourning. Well, there are a lot of really good words coming up. Inspire is really big. Support, different versions of support. Understanding, motivate. And the reason why I'm asking this, so this is the second question I always ask. The reason why I'm asking it here today as well is that these people are also in our leadership paradox, right? Because they are, we're expecting all these kind of things from them, right? We want them to support, we want them to lead, we want them to motivate, we want them to encourage. At the same time, our leaders are people too. And they're also in that journey and in that curve. So they're on two areas of that. Oh, yes, great. So these are also some examples of clouds that came from the groups that I've been with. And it shows that leaders really want to be taken along, because this is not just what they expect, but it's also what they need help with. So if I think about what have I learned from working with these people leaders, because the majority of the sessions that I'm doing is specifically for people who are supposed to lead other people, take other people along with them. One thing is, before this, it needs to be as practical as possible, right? And I love the real examples that you will hear in a moment from Julie, because that will make it real to you as well and as applicable as possible. Get my notes. And that's why this is one of the first ones, and I realized when I was listening to my colleague, tell and retell the story should actually also have the conversation, right? Have that meaningful conversation, because just telling a story will not work. But the reason why I put this here is very often our leaders who are standing in front of a group, they've heard the story already so many times, and they think others did as well. And I've been in groups where we said, oh yeah, we're going to talk about this major project, main project, everyone knows, right? Yeah, that big project. And then I asked them to do an elevator pitch on it. Groups of 4 come together, and then, well, but we know we don't need to do that anymore. But then we did the elevator pitch, and are you telling the story like this? I always talk about this. And then by sharing that story again, you learn from each other and you make your story better every time. So tell it again, ask other people to talk about it. Empathy and trust. I think this is such an important one as well. Because without empathy, without trust, no one will get moving. And I think that's such a powerful story. Has anyone seen Casa de Papel, or Money Heist, it's translated? Yeah, just a couple. Netflix series, very hip and trendy, I thought. It is about a money heist. A couple of bank robbers, and they have a professor, the leader. They follow that person blindly. And it's a really example of trust, because they don't know all the details of the plan. How often does it happen that you also don't know the details of the plan? But if you have a manager, your professor, that you have full confidence in that they have the right thing for you, then you will follow them. And I think trust is such an important thing in any journey. Leading the way. I always say, don't ask anyone to go someplace that you are not willing to go to yourself. And I think a really good example of that is vulnerability. Vulnerability, I think we've heard it today a number of times as well. It's such a trendy management term as well, but how often do you really see great examples of that in your managers, in your leaders, in your trainers? So I really started to try and do that if I'm in front of a group, to also share my own personal stories. And that helps. I'm working for Philips. We're going through quite some change at this moment. And that hasn't always been easy. But what I found is even change managers sometimes struggle with change. So I go through it, and I actually think, how do I go about it? And I ask for help. And then I share that I asked for help, and then asking help made it easier. Sometimes just asking about it and then sharing it, it does help. Empower your champions, and Julie will talk a little bit more about champions, but maybe another one that you are familiar with. Do you know the crazy dancing guy? Leadership lessons from the dancing guy? Yeah, some? That talks about having your followers come along with you, and I think that's so important. And here, the story that Florence told is also so important. Invite them along on that journey. Don't start with them on day X, but invite them to already start with you on that day one. Get them along on the journey, because you need your champions. You cannot do things alone, and you cannot do it on your own. And the last one, and I think that we are in the right crowd for that, is have a little bit of fun. I think this is so underestimated, and it is important. Celebrate what's going well. Have a little bit of fun. Make something a celebration, and actually make time for that. Have a little bit of fun, make room for it. Makes everything lighter.
Thank you, Saskia. That was a lovely way to finish your section. We're a little bit short of time because we started a little bit later. Could we carry on to Julie now, and then we'll come back and we'll do questions with Saskia straight after that, if that's all right with everyone? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Saskia. So now we have Julie, and what can I tell you about Julie? Well, Julie works for a company called Incepta, and it's her role to support clients across the world adopting digital solutions in sectors as diverse as tourism, retail, data analytics, financial services. And she does this in the UK, Japan, Australia, and Italy, to name a few of the places that she works. Julie supports her clients as they adopt and adapt to new ways of working, and guides them through the potential pitfalls that come with major change. The wonderful thing about Julie is that her success is grounded in pragmatism and common sense. Julie.
Thanks, Julie. Thank you for having me today. I'm sure you've already taken a lot of tips from what Florence and Saskia have already shared with you, and I'm sure there is nothing that I'm going to share that you haven't already seen or thought about before as well. But I think the way that I've been coming at the job I've played, and also what I've seen that's worked over the years, is just sort of reflecting on those words, enablement and facilitation, that we quite often hear in the training sense, but I like to think about this in a change sense, in terms of facilitation really is about making things easy. And I always think about that in a lot of things that I do. But I'm also really keen and passionate that learning and development practitioners are seen to have a very holistic place in the businesses they work, rather than a much more of a transactional role. And I think if we are going to really support our businesses and help enable that change, that ultimately it's the business that is trying to transform and change, that we're part of that, then I think, we put ourselves in a really good position to be able to support that. So I hope just over the next few slides, and I'm literally going to rattle through them fairly quickly, I've just pulled together 7 tips that are based on a lot of my experience, but what I've also seen over the years as well. And I should also say, we've already covered quite a lot of these as well, so hopefully they'll be reinforcing some messages. So number one, really how can we in L&D really instill some change awareness? And I really do believe that if we've got change management, understanding change, self-awareness, how do I as an individual respond and react to change? I think if we've got that as part of our core curriculums, we've got that on our manager leadership programs, we've got it on our Leading Yourself programs, actually if you can help people become self-aware and understand what happens when change happens, I just think that can become much more part of an everyday skill and part of the toolkits that people have. And I think in support of what things like Saskia was saying, even things like helping our leaders take away some really simple frameworks and methodologies that they can use in the day-to-day is actually going to be really helpful for them. And also, finally, don't underestimate that I think we can easily take it for granted that because we work in learning and development, that we kind of know what happens in terms of developing new skills, the time it takes, the fear and the discomfort that people can go through, and also the time it takes to become comfortable. Help our leaders and people understand that so that when it comes from what Florence was saying about that day X is not the day that everybody becomes magically brilliant at the new skills and the new capabilities that we're trying to introduce. That's an evolution that will take time after that. And I think we can help people to really understand that. We've talked a lot about fear. As Florence was talking about, we've got a lot of people who are really thinking about these great ideas and the objectives and the transformation that they want to take the business through really early on in that journey. But the people who are then having this kind of, I suppose, at the experience end of this, haven't been a part of that journey. But also, I suppose, we've got to be a bit careful that people don't have their blinkers on. At Acceptor, we talk about digital transformation, and our software is a fantastic piece of software. But there's an awful lot of fear when people hear that there's some great software that's going to help them automate things. There's a lot of fear associated with that. I'm not a software developer. My skills are out of date. That's going to mean, what happens to me in my job? And I think we're in a great position to really be empathetic to that. Help open the eyes of people in the business and just help people just land those messages a little bit, maybe more sensitively to usual. And also just bear in mind that if you've been through long sales processes or you've had lots of conversations about the strategic change that's needed, the people you're working with and who that's going to affect probably haven't been on that journey for as long. So just make sure you've got that built into any messaging and you're not forgetting the awareness raising that they need as well. Understanding the business and align. This is important in a few ways. First of all, what works for clients and companies I've worked for might not work for yours. So really be aware of the culture. What works and what doesn't work has to align to the culture. But also some really simple things. If you're working with product development, software departments, or IT, for example, quite often they're working in Agile. Don't have a plan that includes waterfall project management techniques. Align to what their sprint cycles are. You can deliver your plan and say that, we're going to do X awareness sessions in sprint 91 and we're going to do some training in sprint 102, and then we'll, actually align to the language and be sensitive to what's happening in the business. And also just don't forget that I think learning and development has a much stronger position in terms of any transformation if all of the activities are actually aligned to the business objectives. Really make sure that if you're putting on some, somebody might be needing to introduce some new sales capabilities and sales enablement strategies. That's not just because we want people to learn sales skills. It's usually because there's a deficit in terms of growing the business, or we don't understand our clients well enough. Align to those objectives and make things really real and measurable. Help teams think further. I think this is one of my favorite ones. And again, it was on Florence's timeline there. A lot of the activities, I think the harder work begins once that day X has actually been, once the go-lives happened or once the main kickoffs happened. How many people here, actually help their business think ahead? how many people are really helping their business thinking about things like, have you thought about knowledge management? Do you actually need a centre of excellence? How are you going to kind of embed and create that stickiness? I think it's really easy in that transactional role that learning and development can take, that this is all about just a training event. Can you put on a training course on this day? Actually, I think the conversations that have much more strength are ones that are helping the business leaders to think a little bit further ahead. And I'm sure we've all got stories of when we've seen things that haven't quite gone to plan or haven't quite embedded as nicely as we would like. Help your colleagues and your business leaders think about some of these things that actually, at the end of the day, aren't that hard to think about. We've talked a lot in this session about champions. I'm a massive believer in the use of champions and how they can really help you and help a business transform. They become your voices, and you've also got a really fantastic pool of early adopters. One of the things I've done in the past is actually created champions programs where they are the early adopters who are learning and going through the change and transformation maybe earlier to become those advocates. But a really powerful thing I did with one of our clients recently was asked every single one of those people to share back with their stakeholders and their peers and their managers what they'd learned through the process. So they became advocates, they were able to pay it forward, and you've got that starter of an ecosystem that you can create more naturally and organically. And it helps you to start small and scale up as well. You really, you can't do everything on day one, and this just having champions really, really does help. And again, I think our role in that is to kind of really advise and help and be that consultant and that trusted advisor to share some of these best practices and tips with our leaders. Be agile. This is not necessarily about, applying full-on Scrum in learning and development, although that does work, and there is a session tomorrow on agile in learning and development. But this is about just being mindful and being responsive. So if you can do things in small chunks and just fail fast, respond, and just tune in to any transformation as it's happening. Don't set out your plan for 2025 now. Do things iteratively, and I think just applying some really agile techniques there will massively help you. I think just be responsive and change things as you go. And finally, leading the digital way. I think so much of our change these days involves digital transformation. It's about automation, potentially new softwares, so many things we've all been through in the last few years that have just happened around us. But actually, I think there's two important things here to think about. One is your own teams and our own teams' digital skills. If we're looking at software or acceleration or automation, they're quite hefty pieces of kit normally, big systems, big softwares. But actually, have we got the basics in our teams? There's a really interesting piece of research that the Lloyds Banking Group have done, and it's all about digital skills. And what they've done is a piece of analysis with an organisation called Future.now, which is about understanding what those basic digital skills are that we should all have. And it's surprising how many we lack. So actually look at your own teams first. We should look inwards first, as Saskia was saying. But actually also what programs and what kind of skills gaps have you got in your organizations that could be closed? Have you got the basics right first before we go on to these amazing, transformation programs? Actually, what do the basics look like? Because if you can get the basics right, I think that will help actually, help the bigger picture transformations that need to happen. But I do urge you all to go and have a look at that piece of research there because it's really interesting. And that was it, really. I said I'd rattle through them. So just in summary, they're just some tips that I've taken away, that I've sort of put together for you, that I hope have helped, and I hope you take something from that. But as I said, they're very practical, and it's very much about common sense. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Julie. You did rattle through that. I think we've caught up our time. So has anybody got any? We've got lots of questions and hands going up. So let's get some questions to the panel. And certainly if anybody's got anything they'd like to ask Saskia as well, because we missed out her questions, and also questions for Julie. Can we start with you?
Hi there. This is a question for Julie. And actually Saskia talked about this as well, about the champions being so important. I think in my experience, while you have champions, you also end up with almost victims of change in large organisations, and people who often feel that that's the position that they're put in, that they're a victim of change. So while a change team are sort of all congratulating themselves on how brilliant the change has been and successful, the sort of victims, or perhaps coalface employees, feel, even if they've officially been consulted, via some sort of survey or something, they don't feel included. So in the way that you talked about engaging your champions, how can you engage your, in quotation marks, victims? And is there a way to do that successfully?
Yeah. I think about champions in the perspective of, I suppose go back to the marketing basics. I think, your champions really, I think, should be your early adopters and those who have got the propensity to actually embrace what's happening and embrace the change. And I think if you're choosing people who are sort of maybe feel that way, I'd say maybe they're not the right champions to have, because I think, champions to me are the early adopters. They're the people that are at the start of that curve before you get the swell. And I think, look for volunteers, gently nudge people who you think would be good people. But I think if you need people that would like to take on that role and also be recognised for it. I think people will feel quite, possibly a victim if there's nothing in it for them. So I think you've also got to think about the reward and recognition, and actually recognising their role as potential future champions, mentors, coaches of others as well. I think it's a much bigger role. But you do want people who want that role and who are going to embrace it. You got anything to add?
Yeah, I think very true, and those will be your early champions. I actually also like to get my resistors on my champion list. So I talk a lot about resistance, and in a way, I've been a consultant for a long time. I'm a change manager, so in a way, I'm paid to think the change is a good idea, right? If you are able to get your resistors on board by listening to them, understanding, trying to understand where the resistance comes from, when you get them on board, they will be your best champions, because if they are indeed the right people, they're credible, their peers will believe them, and they know they're not saying this because they are paid for it or it's their role. They are really in it. So I have some examples of very active resistors that became champions at some point.
It's also a sales job. I think we've got a very. I think a huge role that learning and development can take is some influencing skills and actually selling the benefit. Typical sales skills. If there's something in it for the individuals and you've got a match of a bit of a sweet spot, then I think you can take them with you.
I was going to add, if you manage to have conversation before all the decisions have been taken about your change, your resistor have a key role to play, because in the conversation they're going to have the one with the against arguments and they're going to be paired with the one with the for arguments. And that can create a very strong dynamism. And we'd always said in innovation that the solution leads when we meet both the against and the for, and that's where we're going to find really the innovations. So you can actually have the same mechanism for your change. The solution can be found by bringing the two parties together.
Nice.
Thank you. I have another question for you, ladies.
Hi, this is a question for both Julie and Saskia. This is what I find from my personal experience. Everybody becomes an expert on day X and points holes to what should have been done, what you did wrong, but nobody wants to engage on day 0. So that's one. And quite often the resistors you talked about are people who are very charismatic, loud, and sometimes they drown this voice of rationality and and being a bit more amenable to change. So how do you address that? How do you get people interested on day zero when things can be a bit nebulous, not as interesting, but boring, the hard graft? Because, that's what I find people are not willing to give the time or think this is, but certainly everybody becomes an expert when you get the product out.
I didn't actually hear the question. Am I understanding your question correct? Is how do you hear all the different voices?
No. What I'm asking is how do you get people interested in, for example, engaging, giving feedback when you're starting a new project? Because, that time it doesn't look like something tangible. It might be an idea, something which is a bit more nebulous, doesn't have a full structure. So let me give an example. So I work in, healthcare, so I'm a medical consultant. So, for example, we start a new electronic record. But when you want people's feedback, how do you want to do it? How should we do it? People are not interested because they haven't seen the final product. But once you launch the final product, people become experts and say, why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you engage us? But people don't get engaged at day zero.
How do you get the right people involved at the right time?
Yeah, how do you get past day zero confidently?
With everyone on board.
That's a very difficult one.
Yeah.
But there is a bit of analysis you still need to, as you go along. It's rather than wanting to analyze everything just at once, you as you go along, you want to keep monitoring how things are to make sure you have the right people. And somewhere it's not so much about having right now at day one, all the right people. It's about being smart enough to quickly identify if someone is missing, we bring them in. And this is actually way more agile. We somewhere need to move away from having all the answer at the beginning and knowing that we're building things together as we go. So we know we're going to get it wrong, but this is okay because since we want to encourage agile, we learn from it. And if we're missing one person, then we bring that person in.
And I think reflecting on the keynote from this morning, I think it's also important to ask someone have we thought of everyone? So also trying to reach outside of your own network to that layer 1 or 2 layers out. I remember having conversations like a stakeholder engagement session, and then just asking, well, this is the people that we thought of. Do you see anyone missing with your knowledge, with your network? So I think having those meaningful conversations, inviting other views in at different times, I think that would be my biggest advice.
Okay, any other questions?
We talked a lot about how important it is to kind of lead people through the change and how important our champions and our leaders are. How do you manage that in a large organization where potentially you're not the individual who is feeding the information up? So if you are in a position where you're providing information, but it might get kind of subsumed into a large deck of slides, how do you make sure that you are getting the right engagement from those leaders?
Florence, you do that.
Tough question on the politic ones. There's not going to have one answer because it's going to actually depend really of your organization and what type of culture already you have within an organization. Because that's going to give you information of how much mindset you have to change. And sometimes it's about identifying what mindset we have to let go, what mindset we want to adopt. At the same time, it's true that if you don't have at least 1 or 2 leaders that's going to engage with the new mindset you may want to adopt, or that's going to be really to act as sponsor, that's going to make your life really difficult. Because we know the culture change, especially if it's a culture change, it's going to be a drive from the top, a momentum from the bottom, and then things emerge in the middle. So.
Anyone else? Do you guys want to answer that one?
Well, I think having worked in a number of very large organizations, I think at some point you need to get at least one set of ears and see if you can work that further. and try and get that up. And I love how you explain it, like mandate from the top and then momentum from the bottom. I've had like a grassroots network, and then again, trying to get other people to talk. And at some point, if your momentum gets big enough, someone will need to hear it.
I think the only thing I would add is that I think that leadership engagement is key. So you might want to have like a sort of core group of leaders with representatives from each business unit, for example, but then engaging those leadership teams. And again, it comes back to what's in it for me, why are we doing this? And I also think that a lot of these things aren't HR initiatives, they are actual initiatives where the businesses are the people who are wanting to transform, so they should have the voice. And actually, how can you set up a mechanism to support that? And I think, you know, you also don't want to, it might work better to start small, just one business unit, actually get something working, get a blueprint, get some best practices, and then they're almost like your engine room then to help spread the messages and help support as you go out to other units. So I think you can either try and do a broad spectrum together, or you can start small and then see something. But that, again, to Saskia's point, the engagement, the leadership engagement is really key, but it's got to be aligned to what the business is trying to achieve.
I've got another question here.
Hi all. Really interesting talk. A lot of conversation and questions around the champions, and certainly in my organisation, the champions are really easy to find because they're the ones that do the training, they're the ones that get involved, they're the ones that are always positively engaged in all of these things. You can spot them a mile away. I can name probably 20 people in my organisation I know would be my champion. I know the resistors. They're the ones that are kicking up a fuss. Doesn't affect me. Why are we changing? The problem we have isn't with either of those. It's the 70% of people in the middle that are non-engaging, indifferent, don't really care. And whilst they're not actively objecting to the change, they're not supporting it, and they're acting like mud between the gears. And it's very difficult because we've got lots of technical experts who they're doing what they do what they know they're doing, and then the question isn't, you're doing it wrong. It's like, well, why do I need to change? This is working for me. How do you go about targeting those individuals?
Can you connect what you're trying to do to the business strategy? Could that be an angle? Because the more we connect to business strategy, usually the stronger we become, because that can really become a motivator for people. Now, it also depends where you are at with your culture. If people are a bit disengaged because of X, Y, Z, I have no idea, but then it would be how to reconnect them with the business strategy, that then you can use that as a motivator. Because it's all going to have these 70 people you're talking about that they want to see something bigger than what they just do, and they realize the impact, their collective brain, if you come all together. Now, one thing we tend to do, and education also doesn't help us with that, we tend to be educated into not seeing value and smartness in people. We still have a lot of managers using mechanisms that prevent people from feeling smart and using their cleverness. So somewhere, if you really want people to engage, you have to be in a position that you can see everyone as a talent. But that's really a huge shift for a lot of places. And it's extremely interesting, but it's really then you give space for people to give information input, and you have to use it. It doesn't mean you have to base your decision on that, but you have to recognize the value of their input. So it's really big shift if you have to start something like this, but a huge potential. Definitely a huge one.
Saskia, do you want to comment?
Yeah, I think one of the things, might sound a bit negative as well, but I think what I've seen work well, make it really simple to do the right thing, and make it a little bit more harder to do the old thing. And that might sound a bit sneaky in a way. I've implemented Workday. A lot of people might know it, but we really try to cut off all the other routes, and just if you want to take a holiday, there's really only one way to do it. And trust me, that will get people into the system if it's a system implementation. But I'm reading a really nice book on how you move change. You need the elephant, which is almost your heart. You need the rider on the elephant, which is your rational, but you also need to pave the path. And that's making it easy for people. Remove the roadblocks and maybe put them on the old route.
Saskia, can you tell us the name of the book, please?
It's Switch, and it's from the Heath brothers.
Thank you.
If you search for Elephant Rider Path, you'll find it. There's a YouTube video as well.
So we have another question for you, ladies.
Thank you, and thanks for a great session. All three sessions were different, but really, really useful and inspiring. But Florence, I want to speak a little bit around, you talked a lot about the power of conversation, on the ability to create space where you might find innovation, data points, different viewpoints, which I think really builds on what we've heard around really networking successfully to create learning around the trends and where we need to go. How are we going to do this at scale? Like, I'm imagining you guys being brilliant at doing that with your champions, with your senior leadership team, and then we go down levels and levels and levels of leaders. And suddenly we need our middle managers to be having those powerful conversations with the frontline leaders, and we need that to be scaled out in such a way. But I think that's a huge revolution, actually, for most of our businesses, and I think most leaders, I think, are worlds away from really creating space in the way you describe. So have you got any practical tips on where's the starting point? How do we start to have conversations that truly create space without judgment, but we can learn from it?
I'm not sure it's such a huge revolution. I think it's more about the mindset we have. For example, if you take implementing a true learning, culture learning, one of the things is most of the time we say we want a learning culture, but we don't give people time to learn. And that's one of the things, like if you don't give people time to learn, it's not working, but you can actually get some kind of snippet moment. If you're in production flow, you can have is every morning hurdle morning where you actually assess what the production is before the transition of the shift. You could have 5 minutes about learning. I think we could do the same thing for change. We could have 5 minutes about conversation. And sometimes it's about also incorporating, what the mindset you want people to adopt into their daily in an easy way. So it's back to seeing change as a constant, as just an evolution, rather than seeing it as a transformation that's rock things upside down.
I think that word transformation gets used in a lot of ways that
Such
are
a
not
heap
about
word.
change, but they're more about forcing change. Anyway, we've come to the end of this session. If you have other questions, please do come down and chat to our speakers. But I hope that's been interesting. I hope that's given you some inspiration, some ideas, and maybe a bit of hope too, because change is hard. Been there, done that, just about to do a huge change program myself. So I found this incredibly useful. I hope you have too. But please can you thank our speakers for a very interesting hour and a bit well spent. Thank you.
Thank you.